Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know, from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars, topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Schroeder, and this podcast is brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Hope everyone's doing well. Happy Easter Sunday to those who celebrate the holiday. And we got a great show, and I'm really excited about it. We got a lot of different topics within basketball to talk about. It's going to be really exciting. And I'm excited just to break down all these different headlines and storylines that happen within college and NBA basketball. Let's start off with miracles and great plays. Gonzaga. Gonzaga beats UCLA 93-90 in the Final Four. And it was, in my opinion, one of the greatest NCAA games you'll ever see played at this level. And it wasn't just because the fact that there's a buzzer beater to win the game, which Jalen Suggs, hats off to him. That was one of the more clutch shots I think you'll ever see in any sort of basketball realm, because of the fact that Johnny Juzang from UCLA makes a putback to tie the game, and then they just inbound it into Jalen Suggs, who nails that three at the buzzer, banks it off glass. And again, the confidence within Gonzaga trying to get this undefeated season, the way they played on the offensive end down the stretch was big, because guys like Drew Timme really struggled at the beginning of the game, and Corey Kispert as well, but they came up big when they had to. Now, Joel Ayayi, he was big all game. He had 22 points. He was very big. He was the common catalyst of success for this team during the game, but ultimately what it came down to at the end was good play by Gonzaga and UCLA. This is not a game that was lost by dumb plays or turnovers or a misexecution on this, but when I break down basketball for all you guys, I always break it down to three things, and I've been harping this for any upset and also just any game, right? The reason why UCLA was in this game was because of a great game plan of attacking Gonzaga in isolation situations with Jaime Jaquez, Johnny Juzang, and Tiger Campbell. They executed it, and also guys stepped up, like Cody Riley giving you 14 and 10, making jump shots, which was really important to keep Timme at least active defensively because of how great Timme has been offensively. When I mean Timme, I mean Drew Timme, obviously. But they also had belief. They believed that they should be there. No one else expected them to win this game. No one else expected them to get this far. But what it ultimately came down to was the fact that they had the right execution. Now, they didn't win the game because Gonzaga has made a crazy shot. It went down to whoever had the ball last. And that's when college basketball is its best, when teams don't make mistakes to lose games, when they aren't completely outplayed by one another, and when the game is completely decided on just great basketball play, and whoever gets the last shot wins the game. It's exciting because the Houston game versus Baylor was not that, right? But the reason why this game was so exciting was because UCLA comes out, they're the 11th seed, they're playing against the Goliath in Gonzaga. And I referenced this on my last show, that the fact that this is a David-Goliath matchup, because UCLA was a team that clawed their way to get to the Final Four. They went through a lot of adversity. They had to make comebacks against Michigan State. They had to endure an overtime matchup against Alabama. and had to come back and beat Michigan in a defensive battle. And the fact is, this is the ultimate David versus Goliath because no one expected this to happen, that it would be a 3-point win at the buzzer but for Gonzaga. Again, UCLA played well enough to win that game. And this just shows you how good college basketball is. It's the reason why college basketball is so highly regarded by so many people, because it's so exciting, because it really does come down to, yes, it comes down to players playing at a level, but it really comes down to how good your game plan and execution are and how much you believe in one another. The NBA is much different. The NBA, it comes down to really who your superstars are. And you look at players like Johnny Juzang, he should declare for the draft, because the momentum he has right now, the momentum that he's playing with, if you look at that, you're saying to yourself, well, this is how you win games. And it's exactly how you win games. It's exactly how you get the job done too. Because ultimately what it comes down to is the fact that Johnny Juzang had 29 points yesterday. He had another huge game. He played much better in the tournament than he did in the regular season, even though in the regular season, he did give you 15.5 points a game. He averaged over 22 points a game in the tournament. And the fact that he can score it from any level. Now, look, if he stays, he get better and develop even more stuff to his game. But when you have momentum, I think it's always good to declare for an NBA draft if you're talented enough to do so. And Juzang's an unbelievable shooter. He's tall at 6'6". He's got a handle. And you can put him in ISO situations where he can dominate those matchups. As you saw last night, he really dominated those matchups. Pick and rolls, getting switched, because in today's basketball, everyone switches everything, right? And my philosophy on switching things is, the reason why it works in the NBA is because of bigs that like to shoot threes. In college, I didn't always think it works because you're putting a big on a guard and you have to trust that your big can stay in front of them, which, look, Drew Timme did a good job at times guarding these guys off the dribble, but it's tough. I mean, you're asking Watson and Timme to guard Johnny Juzang, Tiger Campbell, and Jaime Jaquez in ISO situations when they're all very creative and very good in ISO situations. That's why Mick Cronin puts them there. And ultimately, right, college basketball comes down to matchups, and it comes down to also of what are you going to do execution-wise to win the game at the end. And ultimately, when it comes down to execution, both teams executed. I thought at times UCLA had the game won with that big three that Johnny Juzang hit to put them up 77-75. But ultimately, it came down to the fact that these two coaches are great coaches. Mick Cronin, everywhere he's went, from Cincinnati to UCLA, he's built winning programs. And Mark Few has a 31-0 team right now in Gonzaga. That is a perfect chance to go 32-0 against Baylor on Monday. But I think ultimately that's what it came down to, is the fact that these teams it was one of the best basketball games ever played because these teams just executed so well on the offensive end and threw punch for punch with each other. And that was how they were able to create one of the greater games. And Jalen Suggs is just a gamer. The big blocks he had on Cody Riley, the big steals, and the buzzer beater. Just shows you why he should be a top 2 pick or even the top pick overall in the draft because of all the things he does on the court. Now, the Baylor game versus Houston was not as exciting. They won by a score of 78-59. Baylor just completely dominated the game on every facet. They had 23 assists and 9 turnovers, and they played excellent defense. And look, the game was much different, right? UCLA has much more talent on the offensive end than Houston does. Houston's calling card was their defense. They were the worst team in this Final Four, and I don't even think it was debatable. I mean, they barely beat Oregon State. They barely beat Rutgers. They really, look, hats off to Calvin Sampson for getting this team to that point because their defense was so strong. But they didn't really have a very hard road to get there. First round game was pretty easy. Rutgers was a battle, but they won that. And then they played double-digit seeds in every single game they played. And it's not saying that Houston is not a good team because they are. They deserve to be in the Final Four because of where teams they played and got to that point. But the point I'm making is that they didn't really impress me at all. And them getting blown out by Baylor was not a surprise. Even though Sasser put up 20 points and had 17 to 20 in the first half, and Quentin Grimes had a 13-point game, they didn't have a lot of talent on the offensive end, right? Dejan Jarreau, a guy who's been playing through a hip pointer injury all this tournament, if you watch that, I mean, like, just think this to yourself, guys, right? If you can't score at a high level, You're not going to beat a team that defends you well and can score at a high level. And UCLA proved that to a lot of people because people thought they couldn't score at a high level. But the thing is, they had isolation scores that could take advantage of matchups. And Houston didn't really have that. Houston is a great offensive rebounding team. They play great defense. And, there's not a really effective offensive team. It's not because Kelvin Sampson does not establish a system that he thinks works. It's not because the guys can't score. It's just because if you look at the offensive talent on the other three teams in the Final Four, it's far greater. Baylor has 4 guys who can go get a shot off anytime they want easily. Maceo Teague, Jared Butler, Davion Mitchell, and Matthew Meyer. And Matthew Meyer, if you watch him play, he's a really effective depth piece off the bench because what he does and what he brings is he can bring a sense of a taller guy at 6'9" who can take any big off the dribble, and he can play the 4 for you. And that makes him very dangerous because if you have a guy that's effective off the bench for you, even guys like Flagler too, right? Those guys are effective. And then look, guys like Mark Vital, Flo Thamba, Jonathan Chamba Chachua, these guys are effective players because they know their role very well, right? And the thing with Baylor, they switch everything. They're not as big, right? Even though Chamba Chachua is about 6'8" and Flo Thamba is about 6'9", they're not as big, or they don't run through their bigs as other teams that Gonzaga may have faced, right? Gonzaga playing Creighton, Bishop was a much better big than Flo Thamba and Chamba Chachua. Obviously, the Mobley brothers are very effective bigs. And even Cody Riley last night with his effectiveness. He's more skilled, right? Flo Thamba and Chamba Chachua are guys who want to run the floor very well. They want to rebound at a high level. And they're going to be very effective on dump-offs in the pick and roll. That's kind of what their role is. They run through their guards. That's what Baylor is about. And that's why they dominated the game. Again, they play great defense in the perimeter, right? They forced Houston to have a 10 assist to 11 turnover ratio, which obviously in basketball, all you want to have is a positive assist to turnover ratio. And that comes down to the fact that Baylor offers a lot of pressure. They pressure the ball. And think about it, guys, right? If you're a team that's not very effective on the offensive end and you're getting pressured all game and you have to speed up your sets, if you're a team that plays slower and that wants to walk the ball up and run their sets effectively and you don't have the talent to run those talent, not only the talent, but you don't have the like-minded scorers across the board, because Houston is a team that beats you from the defensive end and beats you from rebounding. They don't necessarily beat you because they have skilled post scorers and they have some skilled guards, but again, the reason why the Gonzaga UCLA game was so effective is because those players were gifted on the offensive end. Houston is gifted defensively. That's what they were calling quarters. And that's ultimately what it came down to for the Baylor Bears in their game against Houston. It was that Houston was good defensively, but just couldn't really guard Baylor as effectively as they wanted to. And they weren't good. And Houston was not good enough on the offensive end to be able to contend with Baylor's scoring. Looked at Villanova. Villanova, when they lost, they played good enough defense to win, but they didn't score enough points because they just couldn't get it done offensively. You look at Arkansas. Arkansas couldn't stop Baylor and turn the ball over too much. So there's really no necessarily key, because against Baylor, you got to take care of the basketball. Against Baylor, you have to run your sets effectively, and you got to be able to guard their guards with switching 5. Now, ultimately, that's important, and people are looking at that in agreement and saying, okay, that makes sense, but who's going to win the championship? Okay, that's fine. Well, the championship is going to come down to a few things, right? I think it's going to come down to who takes care of the ball, how high scoring the game is, because I think that both teams can play high scoring. But I think ultimately what this has come down to, and this is not a knock on UCLA because they are a really good team, as everyone has seen from last night. And I think they have a lot to build upon, because UCLA has, if Juzang stays or leaves, you still have Jaime Jaquez, Tiger Campbell, Jules Bernard, Cody Riley. You're going to most likely get Jalen Hill coming back and Chris Smith if he stays another year. And you got a lot of talent across the board. You're going to get recruits in now because of how the run you've made. And that's going to build UCLA going forward. But Gonzaga and Baylor are the 2 best teams in college basketball, not because they're playing in the championship game, but they have been the 2 best and highest ranked teams all year. And ultimately, they didn't get a chance to play back in December because of COVID-19 issues, but this is the chance and a game that everyone is super excited to see, because it would have been cool to see UCLA, the Cinderella, go against Baylor and see what they could do. But ultimately, everyone wanted to see the perfect season versus everyone's regarded second or first best team, the two best teams going at it. And it's going to be an incredible game. I'm telling you right now, this game might have the chance to be as good or better than the UCLA-Gonzaga game of yesterday. And that's ultimately what it came down to, is the fact that these are the two best teams. Now, I'm going to give you a prediction of where I think this game will go, because I think it's ultimately important to think about, again, who is going to win, the matchups that are going to be deployed, and also how the schemes are very different. So Baylor likes to pressure you from the perimeter up, right? They like to pressure the ball handler, make it hard for you to get in your sets. They like to have their hands in the passing lane when you drive. They like to try and get steals. Gonzaga is very similar at that, but Gonzaga is not as good defensively as Baylor. However, I think that Gonzaga wins this game slightly. I think it's going to be a 1 or 2 point game, and Baylor can easily win this game. That's why I'm saying it's so close. I think the big thing for them is that Gonzaga has guards that can handle the pressure. And I think Drew Timme is just a matchup issue for Baylor, because if Baylor switches everything like UCLA did yesterday, Drew Timme figured it out, and he still had 25 points yesterday, even without a great start to the game. And if they can take advantage of that, and also look, Corey Kispert used his size down low and rebounding. Joel Ayayi did the same thing. So I think Gonzaga's size will hurt Baylor a little bit, because Baylor is not that big on the perimeter besides Matthew Meyer, who's 6'9". The rest of the guards are 6'3" or smaller. And I think that's ultimately going to be the difference in the game. And it's going to be really exciting, though. I think the most exciting teams that we're going to have in the finals. And I think this game has a chance to be as good as that UNC Villanova game from a few years ago, back in 2016. I think it can even be better. This game is going to be a really exciting one. Again, think of the fact that it would have been really cool to see UCLA in there, but if you're UCLA and Houston, you got to give a good credit to your season. And UCLA and Houston both have things they can build upon for the future. Houston, I think, needs to just upgrade their offense a little bit more, and UCLA needs to just continue building what they're building, right? Emphasize that defense, bringing guys who are like-minded scorers who can score in the isolation situations, and it's a very interesting whole situation. This is why college basketball is so exciting, and why March Madness especially is regarded as one of the best sports events of all year, because of this excitement, because it's schools that no one has heard of, and not so no one's heard of, but people have disregarded getting to higher heights because of just the way basketball is played. And it's going to be really exciting to see this championship game on Monday and see who comes out on top. Baylor definitely has a great chance, because, again, these two teams have been regarded as the two best teams in college basketball this season. Mark Few and Scott Drew have done unbelievable jobs, especially just from a difference of style, to be able to get their teams to be able to play at such a high level. Again, Baylor going through the Big 12 and being successful, even though they had to go through all those COVID pauses, and being able to turn up their success again in the NCAA tournament to get to this national championship game, shows just how well coached and how disciplined this team really is. And Gonzaga, right, getting challenged by UCLA in this Final Four game yesterday, and one of the greatest games we'll ever see in the college basketball landscape and in a tournament, and being able to make that game-winning shot and keep their poise and not, get flustered with these runs that UCLA made, and being down and making sure they got the job done. Again, this is what college basketball is all about. And it would have been awesome to see UCLA against Baylor. Obviously, people would have loved to see that, because the Cinderella trying to be the national champion. But I think people also are really excited because these are going to be the two best teams in college basketball going up against each other for a chance to be named the best team in college basketball. And that's what college basketball is about, everyone, right? If you think about college basketball, you think of March Madness. You think of teams that overcome adversity in order to get to the national championship. UCLA has a lot to not hang their head about, a lot of things to build upon. Mick Cronin has done a great job. Even teams like Houston, right? Houston's got a lot of things that they can build upon too. They can, see what offensive schemes they need to, employ a little bit better, how they can get a little bit better shooting, how they can get a little bit better of post presence in there. but their defense is unbelievable. So at least that Kelvin Sampson's defense has been regarded as one of the best defenses in the country. But if you look at UCLA, they got a lot to build on. If Juzang stays or goes, they still have a lot of talented pieces, and they're going to get recruits in because they're UCLA, an LA-based school, and also the fact that they have a lot of talent anyway. So this is going to be really exciting to see what happens here, right? A lot of excitement is definitely coming into this game on Monday to see who wins, to see who gets to crown themselves as the best team in the country. And again, everyone gets to see the two best teams in the country go at it. And I think for a lot of fans, that's what's so exciting, I guess, about college basketball, is seeing the two best teams who've been regarded all year actually get to that point and play against each other. And they came from very different situations in order to get here. So this is going to be really exciting and really fun to watch. We're going to take a quick commercial break here, but when I come back, we're going to talk about the women's Final Four, and we're also going to break down later in the show the Roy Williams retirement, as well as why the Boston Celtics are struggling so much and not a contender in the Eastern Conference this season. All that coming back up shortly when we come back on the GSMC Basketball Podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Schroeder, and this podcast is brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Thanks again for tuning in. My last segment, I broke down the men's Final Four, which featured, I think, one of the greatest games in basketball history. You can say definitely college basketball history, with Gonzaga beating UCLA at the buzzer. Talked about why I think Gonzaga might have the slight edge over Baylor in the championship game, even though I think it's going to be another instant classic. But speaking of March Madness, let's break down the women's Final Four, which also had a lot of excitement around it as well. You got Stanford and Arizona playing tonight in the final, and this was crazy because a lot of people did not expect Arizona to be there. And I think the major headline is just saying that even though UConn had the AP Player of the Year in freshman Paige Beckers, they couldn't get the job done in the Final Four, and Arizona beat them. And I think ultimately, when it came down to that, you know, things happen, right, in basketball, right? You're not always you're playing your best every single night, but this is ultimately, I feel like with basketball, it really can be explained very easily because, look, I mean, you know, I've played some games too where games can be crazy like they were last night with the UCLA and Gonzaga game. But a lot of times, if you just have the right game plan, you execute it, and you believe in yourself and your teammates and your team, you got a great chance to win that game and upset teams that you're not supposed to upset necessarily. And that's what happened with UConn. It was that Arizona had a great defensive game plan that forced UConn to only have 22 first-half points and also forced UConn to have more turnovers than field goals in the first half. And what that ultimately does, when UConn has more talent with Paige Beckers and the other guards they have on their team, what ultimately happens for UConn basketball, what ultimately happens at the end of the day, is that when you watch a team that's less talented, you got to also understand that what goes on is that teams who are less talented have to be really strong in their execution and in their game plan. Because ultimately what happens, like when you have players like Paige Beckers, Christian Williams, Olivia Nelson, Odata, Aaliyah Edwards, all these great players on UConn who average 10 points or more, you got to develop the right game plan of your Arizona, and they did do that. Because ultimately, look, it's really Christian Williams and Paige Beckers that did anything for UConn in the Final Four. Paige Beckers had 18 points, but didn't shoot a very good percentage. And Christian Williams, same thing. So what happened basically is that Arizona employed a really good defensive game plan to pressure Paige Beckers on all her shots, to contest her, and to make things difficult, to make UConn play faster than they wanted to play, to make them make difficult decisions. And ultimately, with women's basketball, UConn is considered the cream of the crop when it comes to this, right? You look at them, and look, you can say that they didn't even deserve to be there because there was a foul that was not called in the Baylor-UConn game. Okay, I get that foul should have been called, but I'm also the mindset, too, that there are probably other plays in that game that could have been called on both teams. So, look, that's a bad missed call, and maybe that determined the outcome of the game. Maybe Baylor gets there. But ultimately what happens is that Paige Beckers is unbelievable, right? She's unbelievable. And if she decides to leave early to go to the WNBA, I understand you can't go right now. You only can go when you're 21 years of age. But since she's older, she can technically go after next year. And I think for her, this is a great learning experience because what she learned is that she has to even add more to her game and even try to get more involvement from her teammates and lessen the turnovers and understand that teams are going to come after her with different defensive game plans every time they play because of how good she is and how good she has been as a freshman. Again, when you average 20 points a game as a freshman, and you shoot 46% from three, 52% from the floor, 87% from the free throw line. You average 5 rebounds and a little over 5 assists. Teams are going to come after you because they know that you're the key for what UConn does, what Gina Auriemma does. And Gina Auriemma is the greatest coach in women's basketball history. You can look at coaches like Pat Summitt. You can look at coaches like Tara from Stanford, and you can say those coaches are better maybe than Gino, but Gino has won 11 national titles. Yeah, Tara Vanderveer. You can say Tara Vanderveer is great, and you can look at players maybe coaches like Pat Summitt from Tennessee, or like coaches like that, and say maybe they're better than Gino Auriemma. But they're not, because Gino Auriemma has won 11 national championships, and he's been to 13 Final Fours. And it just shows you how great UConn is. But it shows you how good Arizona is, because they stunned them by 10 points because of the great defensive game plan they had, and Aari McDonald having 26 points. And UConn just had simply no answer for her. And this is like UCLA, right? This is a team that I think everyone saw as a 3 seed, saying this team's a good team, but they're not going to compete for a national championship. And they proved everyone wrong because of their defensive game plan, because of their belief, and they executed their game plan to perfection almost against UConn, especially from a defensive angle. And that's the beauty of college sports there for everyone, right? Because UConn was a team that everyone saw and saying, oh, look at Paige Beckers, look at Christian Williams, look at Gino Auriemma, look what he's been able to establish. Like, UConn is 28-1. They've been playing so well. They have such a great talented group, and they do. But ultimately, Paige Beckers is the engine that runs everything, right? If she's not shooting her best and not playing her best, ultimately that reflects on the team. Because if your best player who's also your point guard and your leading scorer runs everything for your offense, if they're turning the ball over, not shooting the highest percentages, all this kind of stuff, that fits right into what a team that's trying to upset that team can do. Because Arizona has done it through Aari McDonald's success, but through a great defensive game plan each time they've played. And they don't have as much of talent as these other teams they played against, and maybe as much skill. Like, think about it, right? Houston in the Final Four against Baylor. They ultimately lost because they just didn't have the offensive skill and talent to match up with Baylor. And that ultimately what it came down to is that there was different matchups that favored Arizona from a defensive angle, and the fact that Aaron McDonald took advantage of a lot of those matchups too was ultimately a big reason why they won the game. Also the fact that they held UConn to the lowest point total they've had in the first half all season with 22 points. That makes a huge difference. If you're playing great defense, especially against talented teams, you got a chance. The reason why UCLA last night had a chance to win, because UCLA had the matchups offensively that worked in their favor. The reason they beat Michigan, however, though, is because their defense was so on point. And that's the reason why Arizona stunned UConn, is because their defense was so on point, and they had a star player who could dominate in that angle. And ultimately, what that comes down to is it's the belief in your teammates, the coach implementing the correct game plan to win these games. And this is why people need to respect this, is the fact that you can't just think that UConn is the only good team in women's basketball, right? There's Notre Dame, there's Stanford, there's Tennessee, Arkansas was really good, Arizona obviously this year. And it's going to be really exciting to see this championship game when they go against Stanford, who won last night. But the last point I kind of want to make on this is that just upsets happen because of those three things I mentioned, right? A great game plan, you execute it, and you believe in yourself. Because ultimately, you need to be really disciplined with your game plan and executing it. And yes, the belief has to be there obviously as well. Because if you're not as talented or as regarded as talented as the teams you're going against, that's why the players being disciplined to what the coach gives them and the coach giving the right game plan is that much more important and useful when it comes to these big games. And that's what Arizona did. And they had a great chance tonight, obviously, to be able to do what they have to do to win these games. And ultimately, that's the important thing at the end of the day, is being able to have that right game plan, execute it, and then have this defensive game plan carry over to when they play Stanford, which will be obviously a really tough test again because they got blown out in both games they played against Stanford this year. Speaking of Stanford, the Stanford women's team barely beat, and it was a crazy game. They beat South Carolina, and they beat number 1 seed South Carolina 66-65. And Haley Jones had 24 points and 11 assists, and her play and her passing ability and her scoring had her even compared to the greats of Magic Johnson. Think about that, right? Paige Beckers has been compared to Steph Curry. This is one thing that these players are learning, not just from great women's players they've been able to watch, but also from the NBA as well, because the game is so different now, right? You have to be able to do so many different things to be successful. And Haley Jones did a great job. And you also have Kiana Williams, right? Who's their leading scorer for the season, who's been playing well. You also got Lexi Hull, who can provide some versatility at the big spot, and Cameron Brinks, is a big that can run the floor very well, who can post up a little bit. Again, she gets you 10 points a game, and she does that because she can run the floor very well. And especially if you're a talented team and you're in a game where it's a dogfight, where it's a defensive battle, you got to be able to get easy points in transition. If your bigs run the floor, that's why a lot of college coaches emphasize that. And this is one reason why I think Stanford is so good, is because Lexi Hall and Cameron Brinks are versatile and mobile bigs that can provide easy buckets and opportunities for guards like Kiana Williams and Haley Jones to score for themselves, and also to get these bigs running in transition where it's just easy for these players to be effective. And it's just that's the one great thing about basketball, is that it comes down to how your talent is, but it also comes down to your coaching and the belief that you have in yourself, and the fact that there's going to be a game of runs. Ultimately the exciting thing when it comes down to this stuff is because there's so much excitement around this level of success, and ultimately that's the important thing here. When you look at stuff like this, you got to be able to look at these teams from different angles, right? The men's games people are going to look at as the headlines for this weekend, but you should also be looking at the fact that tonight Stanford and Arizona are playing against each other for the third time all season, and it's going to be really exciting to see how this game unfolds, because I think Stanford's talent from every angle, they can score inside and outside, makes them really difficult to guard. And I think with UConn was definitely the best team from a talent perspective in the country. You can argue that Stanford was as well. But the reason why I think that UConn is a little bit easier to guard is because Paige Beckers, even though they have talented pieces around her, she runs everything. Now, Haley Jones is fantastic, but you also have Kiana Williams, who's a leading scorer, right? You have Lexi Hull, who's a good versatile big who can score, drive to the basket from inside and all that kind of stuff, right? Then you also got Cameron Brinks, who can score off rebound dump-offs, can score on the post, run the floor, and it's an important thing. It's going to be interesting to see how this thing all unfolds, and it'll be interesting to see how this game goes. But what's also interesting is that Stanford's looking for their third national championship under Tara Vanderveer, and Arizona's looking for their first national championship, and it'll be really exciting. Adia Barnes is looking for her first national championship. And obviously no one expected this to be the way it is. People thought it was going to be UConn and Stanford probably, or UConn and South Carolina. Teams like that, right, obviously. And people think that Baylor deserved to be in there, right? Which, look, you can make an argument for that, but there are other, again, a foul call does determine certain parts of the game, but it doesn't determine why teams win or lose games, right? And ultimately, this is really exciting for not just basketball itself, but just for women's basketball to have a Cinderella story in a sense, even though they're a 3 seed, but no one expected Arizona to get to this point where they would play. Well, not no one, but a lot of people did not expect this, right? People expected it to be a UConn because UConn has been so dominant. But my prediction goes that Stanford has set the record for most three-pointers in the NCAA tournament history, and they made 55. And they have great defense, and they match up well with Arizona, and they're going to be tougher to guard because they have an inside-outside presence, and they have multiple guards who can really score and that run their offense effectively. And UConn was really just a 2-player show. Stanford's not really that. Stanford's got 3, 4, 5 players who can be really effective on the court, and that makes them really difficult to guard. They're very balanced. Even though UConn has players that can be effective and they have 4 players that average double figures, it ultimately came down to a 2-woman show. And that those 2 players, you take them out of the game, it causes a domino effect for everyone else. And really it came down to if they could shut down Paige Beckers or not. And Paige Beckers really, she had 18 points. She did not shoot a very good percentage. She was 5 of 14 from the floor. And it's not a knock on Paige Beckers. She's unbelievable. But it's just, and she's going to be a really special talent and I think really bring a lot of fun flair to the WNBA when she's there. But Arizona had a great, because Stanford has major balance and they used that in different angles, right? The reason they beat South Carolina was because, number 1, they played great defense, and number 2, they had multiple players score and get involved, right? Haley Jones had an incredible game, obviously. 24 and 11, that's fantastic, and especially in big moments, it's unbelievable. But it's not just her that can be effective, right? Kiana Williams is the best player on that team from a scoring perspective. And then you also got players, like I said, Lexi Hull, Cameron Brinks, and you have a Hall of Fame coach in Tara Vanderveer who's been there many times and has won multiple national championships. So I think ultimately the experience of getting to the national championship from the coaching perspective, the talent on their team, the skill, the athleticism, ultimately, in the fact that they've beaten Arizona twice before handily, and I think they're going to have a different game plan to attack that defense, ultimately makes them the favorite. And if you think about it, that's what's going to be special about this run, I think, for them, is being able to get it done in a huge event. Now, again, Arizona could totally beat them because Arizona has been able to rely on Ari McDonald and their defense and their great game plan and be able to get the job done there too. Because think about it, basketball is a game where a lot of stuff can happen at any given moment. Anything can happen. Any kind of situation can happen. Any team can win in college basketball, in March Madness especially. But I think that Stanford has been here enough in terms of Vanderveer being here enough to at least get the job done. I think that's the problem too, is that when you look at these teams, who have these upset runs, you got to look at how the experience has been. Have they been here before? And has a coach been here before? And I'm not saying the coach can't get it done because, again, Arizona has got here for a reason and they got a 3 seed for a reason. But when you lose to a team twice as handily as they have lost, that means talently you're not very proportionally as good as them. And ultimately, that's the problem with them too, is that there's a lot of issues with these matchups between Stanford and Arizona that don't make me confident that Arizona is going to win this game. Now, they could surprise everyone and do it anyway, but I think that just Stanford poses too many matchup issues for Arizona that they can't just focus on one player and take away everything. I think that there are 3 players at least on Stanford that can create their own shot, and that makes things really difficult for a team that's game plan, because if you only have 1 or 2 players that you can focus on, it makes your defense much easier. And I think ultimately for Stanford, they got to be able to really use all their options, run their offense effectively, make threes and score from the inside, and understand that they are the more talented team and that they have beaten this team twice, but that Arizona will come out with a different game plan to negate those struggles. So at the end of the day, I see Stanford winning this game, but they got to at least play to the level they played in the Final Four and throughout this tournament. They got to make threes and they got to use their bigs inside to really pose those matchup issues like I just spoke about. And it's a beauty of college basketball, and we'll see what happens, because I think this is going to be a really exciting game, especially on Easter Sunday. This is going to be really exciting for people to watch and enjoy, and just enjoy the greatness of women's basketball, in my opinion. So this is a really exciting opportunity for both teams, but I got Stanford winning this game. We're going to take a quick commercial break here, and then when I come back on, we're going to talk about Roy Williams and his retirement from North Carolina, as well as later on in my show, I'm going to talk about why the Boston Celtics are not a contender in the Eastern Conference and why they've been so poor this season. So all that coming back up when we come back from this break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Schroeder, and this podcast is brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Well, we definitely got this show started off with a lot of excitement with the craziness that unfolded with the men's Final Four, especially Gonzaga and UCLA, and then also talking about the major upset in women's basketball that has created a final of Arizona versus Stanford tonight, as opposed to maybe seeing a UConn-Stanford championship, which will be a really exciting couple of games, especially tonight and then tomorrow with Baylor and Gonzaga. It'll be really exciting. Speaking of college basketball, though, and college basketball has a lot of great coaches, obviously, right? Mike Krzyzewski, Roy Williams, Dean Smith, John Wooden, John Calipari. You can say like Mark Few, Nate Oates, Mick Cronin, obviously, and Mike Woodson now is the new Indiana head coach, and Jay Wright, great coach at Villanova, and look, there's a lot of great coaches out there, obviously, right? There's a lot of great players in college basketball, obviously. But what I think the greatest news when it came out of this whole event of college basketball was, it wasn't necessarily great because of this event, but it was just crazy that this actually did happen, was Roy Williams decided to retire from coaching at University of North Carolina. And a lot of people didn't expect this because they thought his energy levels were off the charts, and the fact that he was still able to get this team to the NCAA tournament and they were trending in the right direction. A lot of people were sitting there and saying, oh, wow, this is a crazy event that unfolded. Why did Roy Williams decide to retire? And Roy Williams said in his press conference he just didn't feel like he was the man for the job anymore. And that could be time he wants to spend with his grandkids. That could be just him not thinking that his system works as much anymore. And I would probably push back a little bit on it if his system doesn't work, because I think it still does in college basketball. I think it was pretty effective for them, actually, down the stretch when they started to play a little bit better. But ultimately, what this comes down to for me is the fact that we got to start appreciating how great of a coach Roy Williams really is. And look, I get it. John Wooden, Krzyzewski, those guys have more career wins, and Jim Boeheim regarded as better coaches. But I think Roy Williams is one of the best developing coaches, and I think he's one of the best peer coaches to ever coach in college basketball. And the reason why I say that is you got to look at this guy's resume. He coached for 33 years, and that was at Kansas and also at North Carolina. And he had been to 9 Final Fours, won 3 national championships, 1 in Kansas, 2 in North Carolina. He's the only coach in history to have 400-plus wins at 2 different schools. And he has the 11th most wins in college basketball history at 903 wins. And think about as an assistant coach, he coached players like James Worthy and Michael Jordan and Sam Perkins and Kenny Smith. And then also he's coached players like Ty Lawson, Danny Green, Tyler Hansborough, James McAdoo, Justin Jackson. I mean, look, the list can go down the line of how great of a coach this guy is and what he's been able to mean to the game. But I think also the fact is, too, is that he developed guys. Look at a guy like Luke May, for example, right? One of the recent All-Americans he had in 2019, a 6'8" power forward. Luke May came in, didn't play a whole time, but he developed Luke May into being an All-ACC, All-American type player because Luke May was able to get the most out of his skill set with Roy Williams. Luke May was not the most athletic guy. He wasn't a guy that could jump the highest, but he was 6'8", he was strong, he could post up, and he could, shoot the three at a high percentage, and he gets to the rim a little bit, but Roy Williams developed that because Luke May really was just a three-point shooter coming into college, and Roy Williams developed him to being a complete player. Look at Cameron Johnson, for example, a three-point shooter that developed other parts of his game, and look at him now succeeding in the NBA. And you can even just go down the line. Garrison Brooks, the development he made over this period of time, right? And Armando Bacot going from year 1 to year 2. These guys all got better because of Roy Williams, because Roy Williams got the best out of these guys, because from reports, they consider him just like a guy who, was a kind of a father figure to a lot of these players, a guy who got the best out of these guys, and was also just, as people described it from ESPN, a gentleman. And when I look at Roy Williams, I think of a few things, right? I think of the fact that his team was heading in a better direction after a disappointing 2020 season. The fact that he was able to win the 11 ACC titles, that's more than Krzyzewski's had. More than coaches like Tony Bennett. And if you think about that, that's remarkable because besides this year, where the ACC was clearly down, for the past 10 years, the ACC has been arguably the best conference in college basketball over that period of time. And being able to win 11 ACC championships, that's unbelievable. And it shows you how great of a coach he really is. And I think the fact is that the one-and-done stuff has helped build winning teams for Krzyzewski every year. But I think also for Roy Williams having a little bit less one-and-done guys, still going to a great program in North Carolina, and making North Carolina still one of the blue bloods of college basketball after leaving another blue blood in Kansas where he made them super successful. It just shows you that this guy really was an unbelievable coach and needs to be respected as that. I think the fact is, too, is that he had a great kind of scheme that worked really well for him and the teams that he coached. If you think about it, he coached guys into understanding that they had to be good in transition and have a really good secondary break, because in basketball, right, there's that transition offense, which is basically you push the ball ahead, you try to get an easy bucket ahead of the defense, right? Secondary breaks are usually when you can't get something really quick in transition and you run a miniature kind of offense that's a quick hitting offense that allows a lot of easy buckets to be made. And their secondary break works remarkably all the time because their bigs were always really good at running the floor and really good in transition. They were good screen setters. And most of the time, their bigs were skilled enough where they could run that high-low action. If you watch North Carolina play at all this year, they loved that high-low action all the time, similar to how USC with the Mobley brothers did it this year too, because they had bigs who could score down low and impose their will. North Carolina is one of the biggest teams in the country. They usually are, because of the fact that they can get the ball into the post and throw it down to guys. But I think also the bigger thing too is that North Carolina was one of the best, has been regarded as one of the best offensive rebounding teams in the country during Roy Williams' tenure. And that's important, right? Think about it, right? If you're getting offensive rebounds, your bigs are active on the offensive end, so they're going to be more engaged on the defensive end. And you're getting extra possessions for your offense, especially when you're playing high-level competition. You need to have those extra possessions in order to be successful. And also, what's crazier about this too is that you're preventing the other team from getting easy buckets on the other end because you're constantly attacking the offensive glass and putting pressure on those teams to be successful. And ultimately, that's what it comes down to, right? Ultimately, that's the success these guys have, is being able to do this kind of stuff and be successful at certain areas of the game and being able to develop certain great offenses. And Roy Williams, having bigs that could run the floor, having bigs that can dominate from the post and get great offensive rebounding position, that's important. And it comes down to the fact of what Roy Williams is able to develop at a high level, not been replicated as effectively as a lot of other schools. If you think about schools that have struggled with just the effectiveness, you think about, I even would say that like Calipari, even though he's been able to develop a lot of really good one-and-done guys, having guys there for 4 years who've been able to develop properly. You can look at Isaiah Briscoe maybe as an example, maybe a guy like Tyler Eulis, but Roy Williams, I think, is one of the best guys, if not the best guy right now. Maybe you could put Jim Boeheim ahead of him in terms of just development and developing these guys properly to be able to win and also get better over 4 years. And a lot of times people look at the one-and-done guys, and look, a lot of these guys who are one-and-done are high-impact guys, right? I wouldn't discourage guys like that go to Kentucky to not do the one-and-done rule. But the issue is that you're not developing as much of that team chemistry. And I think that's the reason why North Carolina has been so successful under Roy Williams, is because he's been able to develop that chemistry, the continuity, the development within these guys getting better over 4 years. And ultimately, maybe they don't always turn out to be better NBA guys than these one-and-done that Kentucky produces or Kansas produces or Duke produces. But ultimately, when you have the guys coming in and you have a sense of continuity, you're able to develop these guys properly. I mean, look at the development, even though he decided to transfer out. Look at like a guy like Walker Kessler had his huge development over the year. He got better as the season got on. Armando Bacot, right? He wasn't ready as a one-and-done guy at North Carolina. He had to develop. You look at Damian Sharp. I mean, again, he was a guy that struggled a little bit at the beginning of the time with his skill, and now he's positioned himself to be a really high-value one-and-done pick. And that's all Roy Williams' development, right? You look at Duke this year. Look, Matthew Hurt, obviously, Coach K did a great job. And this is not taking away from great coaches like Calipari and Krzyzewski and Boeheim. I look at Roy Williams and the guys he's developed, and I see more cases of that than just these one-and-done guys having successful years at Duke or Kentucky or Kansas. And ultimately, that's what I think it comes down to for Roy Williams and why he needs to be regarded as one of the greatest coaches. And I know he is, but I think he needs to have more respect on his name. And you got to put him in that conversation with Krzyzewski. Even though Krzyzewski has more career wins. National championships, go to Roy Williams. ACC titles, go to Roy Williams. And that's development, right? You're able to develop these guys so when they get in these situations, they have the continuity and the chemistry to get it done. And I'm not saying Krzyzewski hasn't developed that. I'm saying Krzyzewski just had way more one-and-done guys because and same with Calipari, because they foster that, right? And then you have a new team come in the next year, and you have to develop chemistry from scratch. It's why like a little bit of a younger team like North Carolina this year, when they were able to develop through the COVID protocols and get better as the year got on, and get to the ACC semifinals, while Duke struggled all year because they had a bunch of freshmen come in and couldn't quite get over that hump because of the fact they just didn't have that chemistry because they have a whole new team coming in. And that does make a huge difference at the end of the day, and that does make a huge difference when people ultimately look at great coaches. And look, obviously Krzyzewski will probably be regarded as the greatest coach, him and John Wooden, because of the amount of wins he's had. But ultimately, when I look at Roy Williams, I think of the fact that Roy Williams has been able to get these players to really buy into his system and buy into winning. And that's just the important thing there, is when people look at Roy Williams, you got to understand that this guy is a winner, this guy's a champion, and this guy is a developer of men and of players. He's just a great mentor. And all these coaches are like that. But this is why you got to appreciate great coaches when you have the chance, because you never know how long they're going to stick around. This is why you got to appreciate Coach K and appreciate Bill Self and appreciate Jay Wright and appreciate John Calipari and Jim Boeheim, because these guys, you don't know how much longer they're going to be around. And there are different ways to achieve greatness, obviously. You look at Calipari, the way he's achieved greatness is by all the great NBA talent he's produced. You look at Bill Self, all the national championships, the success of the teams every year. Coach K with recently one and done, great talented guys. If you look at all this kind of stuff, that's where it ultimately comes down to, is that these teams know how to win, know how to get it done, but there's different ways to win and be successful as a coach and be considered great. Roy Williams is great because of the NBA talent he produced, yes, but the amount of wins he's had, the amount of national championships he has had, and also look at the fact that the development he's made of these great players over time, and even just the current players now, into players that can ultimately have successful careers at North Carolina and build the blue blood even further down the line. And that's ultimately what it comes down to, is when you're looking at these certain teams, when you're able to develop this talent, you got to be able to get these guys to the high level they can. And that's ultimately why Roy Williams is just the Hall of Fame coach and ultimately one of the greatest coaches to ever coach in college basketball history. And, you can make an argument between him and Krzyzewski because of the fact of development versus just one and done. And I think it's same thing with him and Calipari, right? I would take Roy Williams over Calipari just from a development standpoint, even though I think Calipari is a good coach. Calipari is a guy who ultimately gets these guys one and done to go to the NBA, and that's why he's developed such great NBA talent, because he tells these guys what they need to get to the NBA. Roy Williams does that, but Roy Williams also is saying, all right, I'm going to develop you because you're not ready to go, right? And that's also super important because the Kentuckys, the Dukes, and the Kansas usually get the better recruits because of the one-and-done scenario. But Roy Williams being able to develop just as good of teams with slightly less talent coming in and making those guys as talented as these players in some cases shows how great of a coach he is. And everyone should just be really appreciative of his career, not looking back and saying, "Oh, why did he retire? That's crazy." He's 70 years old. I mean, that's a good age to retire from any job. And, a lot of guys retire a lot earlier than that. And ultimately, he's going to go down as one of the greatest coaches to ever live and built a great standing at Kansas and also at North Carolina. So that'll be really interesting. But coaches to replace him, you have to look at guys like his longtime assistant who's been there for almost 10 years, and Hubert Davis. He left ESPN in 2012 to become an assistant for Roy Williams. And he has the closest ties with Williams. He played for Roy and understands UNC basketball because he's been there the last couple of years, been there for their national championship teams. And ultimately, too, you have a guy that I think he's the candidate to get the job because of the fact that he has the closest ties and he deserves it. He's been an assistant, and this is the school that he knows and should be the coach there. But the second guy that people are looking at is Wes Miller because he has ties to Roy Williams as well. He played in 2005 for his national championship team. And he has a 182 and 134 record at UNC Greensboro. Has gotten the team to 2 NCAA tournament appearances and had them finish top 3 5 years in a row in their conference. Also, he's considered at 38, one of the best coaches under 45 in the country. And again, he has connections to North Carolina, which I think people wouldn't be angry about that. But in my opinion, Hubert Davis deserves the job because he's been there the longest, and I think he deserves a head coaching job at the place that he's been for so long. And I think if you ultimately look at that, look, Wes Miller might be a good fit as well, but Hubert Davis deserves the job because of the fact that if you're an assistant, you deserve the job. Like Jeff Cable at Pittsburgh, right? You can be successful. And I think also knowing the school helps him a lot too. It'd be like being there, being with the trends of the different basketball, the man for the job. And just look at certain teams around the basketball landscape, right? Roy Williams leaves Kansas, leaves a successful program to go to North Carolina. Who replaces him? Oh, right, Bill Self, who's been one of the best coaches in college basketball. So people should have faith that Hubert Davis could be that too. Not saying Wes Miller can't be that. Again, I think one of these two guys could be a great coach. And also, you don't know. There might be guys at different schools who would take that job very willingly. And the head coach at NC Central could take that. Or coaches like Jay Wright might take it. I mean, you don't know. An NBA guy might take the job. I mean, you don't know. But I think it's going to be Hubert Davis because I think with his ties to the program, the fact that he's been an assistant there for the longest time, I think that he has an opportunity to really coach this team to a high level because he's been around Roy for a very long time and understands how Roy coaches. And I think he can put his own twist on what Roy has brought and make this team still a relevant blue blood in college basketball. Because you're going to get the high-level recruits. You're going to get the talent because you're North Carolina. And especially because he's a guy that did coach with Roy Williams, that's going to help entice a lot of recruits to go there. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what makes this so exciting, is that if you get an assistant to coach there and he ends up being super successful, the sky's the limit for these guys and their success. And I think that ultimately, that's where it comes down to for these guys and being able to develop a successful program. And also, look, you have to appreciate greatness while it's there. Like I said before, John Calipari, he may not be there for 20 more years and stuff like that in Kentucky, even though he's got a huge contract. Bill Self just got signed to a lifetime contract, which gets renewed every 5 years. You look at guys like Mick Cronin. I mean, he's been doing a fantastic job this year with UCLA. You look at Krzyzewski, obviously, you don't know how long he's going to stay. Or Jim Boeheim, right? I mean, these guys are all incredible coaches, and you got to appreciate their greatness while they're still here because you don't know when you're going to see them next. So that's ultimately where it comes down to. Honored and grateful to be able to witness such a great coach like Roy Williams be able to build a great program in North Carolina. Again, I grew up a Tyler Hansborough fan and a Danny Green, Ty Lawson, even though I also ultimately looked at Villanova as a team because of just I love Villanova and I love their style. I grew up just loving that 2009 National Championship North Carolina team, and that's a credit to Roy Williams and just the system he was able to build there. That's why they're so successful at the end of the day. So we're going to take a quick commercial break here, but when I come back on, we're going to break down why the Boston Celtics have been such a disappointment this year and why I don't consider them an Eastern Conference contender. And we're going to break all that down when I come back on to the show shortly.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Schroeder. This podcast is brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Thank you for tuning into the show, obviously. This has been great to have you guys join the program again. And my last segment talked about Roy Williams, his retirement, and the greatness of what he's been able to accomplish at Kansas and North Carolina. Truly one of the greats to ever coach in college basketball, and needs to be appreciated as such. But I think this segment, what I'm going to break down a little bit for you guys, is talk about what is going on with the Boston Celtics. And I know this has been talked about before on this podcast by different hosts, but I think it's just the fact that they haven't really gotten better from those discussions. I understand they don't really probably listen to sports analysts a whole ton, but the fact that they haven't improved, which I expected them to, after a couple months, they still stagnated around that 7th, 8th spot, is really concerning. They're a game below 500 at 24-25. They're 8th in the East. And look, I understand they beat Houston on Friday, but it doesn't fill me up with optimism that they beat the Houston Rockets. The Houston Rockets are the second worst team in the NBA. So if you're not beating them, there's a real problem, in my opinion. And when they play the good teams, they get down to big leads, like against Dallas when they were down by 20 and then ended up clawing back and making it a game. But this is a problem for them, right? They consistently do this. Against Milwaukee, they were down 20 and try to come back and make a difference. Again, they lost to the Knicks by 30-something this year. And it isn't good. I mean, like, this is just a team that needs to figure it out. But the thing is, people are looking at blaming other guys, right? Like, not just blaming the players, but they're looking at, let's blame Brad Stevens. He's the problem. When a team's losing, it's not particularly one guy that's the problem all the time, right? The players, especially NBA players, they don't need motivation to go out there and play from their coach. They should have motivation anyways. And when I look at Boston, there's a few things that are very wrong with this team. And it's interesting because I've spoken about this before, but the thing is, when you are a good team, you get, like I said, you have to have a great, in the NBA, you have to have great talent and you got to like work together, right? That's the whole thing in the NBA. It's very different than college. But the big problem too is the fact that Kemba Walker has been a shell of himself this season, right? And I like Kemba Walker. I think he's a great player. I think he's a great teammate. I think he does a lot of things that can really help a team win. But this injury, I don't know, maybe it's come because of the injury, but he's really performed at a predominantly worse level than he has in the past. I mean, let's just break it down for this angle and look at the fact that he's almost a 20-point per game scorer. He shoots 43% from the floor and 36% from 3 from his career. This year, he's shooting around the same from 3, but he's shooting 39.5% from the floor. He's averaging 18.3 points a game. In the most recent game against Dallas, he was 7 of 19 from the floor. Again, this is the problem with him. He's not shooting a consistent percentage. And Boston needs a third consistent scorer. And he is a guy that also in the playoffs, because of his size, he struggled against Toronto and didn't perform to his highest level. That's the problem I see there. It's just that when I look at Boston, I see Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and Kemba Walker, if they're all consistent, as 3 very legitimate options in the Eastern Conference. However, as soon as that started to progress, though, I see that there's been a lot more issues in terms of how they've been able to play. And that's because of Kemba Walker being one of the issues. Kemba Walker has been inconsistent. He's getting the same shots he's gotten most of the time in his career, and in Boston especially. Those pick and rolls where the big does a drop coverage and he shoots threes. Kemba Walker is just not making shots. And look, his size does hurt him when he goes to the rim, but he's an effective player. He's been an all-star for a couple of years now, and just not performing at that level this year has been very disappointing. Now, people would probably take 18.3 points a game for most guys, but when you're shooting below 40% from the floor, you're not going to win many games with that if that's your third option offensively. And I think also the problem is you have to look at Danny Ainge in a sense. I'm not saying because he's not a good executive, because he's done really well in the draft. But I think trading away Daniel Tice was a mistake. And the reason why I think it's a mistake is because he gives you better production than Luke Cornett and Mo Wagner gave you. I understand you may want to be developing around Robert Williams, and I get that because Tristan Thompson has not been really what you guys expect if you're from a Boston fan, what you expected. Right, he's just not a very high-level offensive player, and he hasn't been playing great. But Daniel Tice gave you about 10 points and 8 rebounds when he played for you. And I look at that, and I don't really understand why they got rid of him. I don't really understand the whole deal there. Like, the thing is, I would understand if you got rid of him to get Andre Drummond, right? Or if you're like, okay, we're not going to really bring in a ton of fours. We're just going to have Robert Williams be our center, and then we're going to get Mo Wagner to back him up, and okay, that's fine, right? Or, we're going to have Tristan Thompson come off the bench. Okay, that's fine, right? Because I think Robert Williams should be starting for you if you're a Boston Celtics fan, because I think that he actually does provide a lot of really promising talent for you guys, especially from a rebounding and defensive standpoint. But Mo Wagner has not been the answer you guys are looking for. I mean, look at statistics-wise. I mean, Mo Wagner averages a lot less points and less rebounds, and when he's played, he isn't. He's not that he's not a good player, because he's fine. But Daniel Tice, provided a much more tougher defensive presence. He was better on the glass, and I just think that was a mistake to let him go. And I think that's one problem. I think the fact is now they're also 22nd in defensive efficiency, and they were top 6, top 5 last season. And I think that was one of the best things they had, was the fact that they were so dominant defensively with their wings and Marcus Smart and Daniel Tice providing a good center role. Even though they're small, they could play good defense. And that's what kept them in the series with Toronto, and that's what ultimately let them win that series. And even against Miami, that's what that got them a couple of wins, because they could lock up people. This year they haven't been able to do that because their bigs just haven't been playing consistent enough defensively. Like, Robert Williams blocks shots, but he also gets into foul trouble a lot. And it has been a mixture of kind of the sense that they just aren't as good defensively as they have been in the past. And I think that's a major problem if you're going forward and you're trying to win a championship or contend in the East. You got to be able to play defense. You're playing against teams like Miami, Philly, Brooklyn with their 3 stars, and Milwaukee, right? You're not going to be able to win those games if you can't guard anyone. And that's the problem too. Like, Luka Doncic tore him apart. I mean, he tears everyone apart, basically, it seems like. But he was just, playing with them because they don't really have any rim protector without Robert Williams there, who, again, gets in foul trouble. And they've had in and out of the lineup, I get that. But they're just not as good defensively as they need to be to win a championship or even contend in the East. And that's tough because Brad Stevens, look, he deserves some blame because I think he needs to, be a little bit tougher on the guys. But I don't think he's ultimately the problem with this team. I think it's ultimately the fact that they've also had a lot of injuries, a lot of COVID pause that had a few guys out, and they've had these trades happen. So they really haven't been able to develop great chemistry either, and that's been a problem too. I think the problem also is just like I said before, they have a big inconsistency at their big guy in terms of scoring production, right? Tristan Thompson gives you about 8 points. That's not great. Robert Williams gives you 7 points. Okay, but those aren't legit offensive options. Robert Williams could be something special for you if you're a Boston fan and looking for the future, because he's young, he's athletic, he can block shots, run the floor, but he gets in foul trouble a lot. And as a result of that, you can't keep him on the court a whole ton. Even though he'll give you 4 or 5 blocks, he's not super skilled offensively. And teams are going to figure that out. He needs to get a little bit more skilled offensively. He needs to be a little bit more consistent in terms of being able to play more minutes. And I think also he needs to stay out of foul trouble, right? And just block shots, rebound at a high level, and finish dump offs and alley-oops on pick and rolls. That's really all he needs to be able to do to be effective. But he's not always playing a lot of minutes because he's either injured or he's getting in foul trouble. So that ultimately is the problem there. Even though against the Pelicans he had 6 blocks, again, you're losing to teams like the Pelicans at home, and you lose to teams like the Knicks by 30, and you're losing to the teams like the Wizards. Again, there's just a lot of head-scratching results that Boston's had this year. And I think it's because Jason Tatum's not quite himself. Like, he's even said he's felt the effects of COVID more. He hasn't, he's averaging 25 points a game. He hasn't quite been himself. Jaylen Brown's been the only consistent option on this team. And he's playing unbelievable. But, again, they don't have the talent to be a top 4 team in the East. Miami's more talented with Oladipo, Butler, Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, and Goran Dragic. They're a more talented team. Boston really has 3.5 guys, because you can look at Fournier and say Evan Fournier has been a great addition because he had 23 points the other night. But, okay, who do you have 23 points against, though, guys? Oh, right, the Houston Rockets, right? The Houston Rockets, who I just mentioned before, are the second worst team in the NBA. So that doesn't show me a whole lot. Against Dallas, he had 6 points, and in the first game against the Pelicans, he was 0 of 10 from the floor and had 0 points. If you're going to win a championship, you got to have a reliable bench. Oh, which is another point I'm going to make up right now, too, is that Boston has no bench. They have no bench scoring. Evan Fournier had a 23-point game. Okay, that's great. Jeff Teague has not been what they expected. Semi Ojeleye is not a high-level scorer. He's a defender. Peyton Pritchard's been good, but he's not like an elite-level scorer yet because he needs to develop into that. And comparably, you look at like the bench scoring of different teams. Detroit Pistons have a better bench than them. The Lakers, in my opinion, have a better bench than them. Philadelphia's got a better bench. Brooklyn's got a better bench. I mean, you can go down the line. I mean, it's just that you want to contend. And let's even look at Miami's bench. Miami has a better bench. I mean, with guys like Gabe Vincent and Goran Dragic and Andre Iguodala, and you bring Tyler Hero off the bench. I mean, you want to compete in the East, right? You got to have a reliable bench. And Danny Ainge has got to make better moves than Evan Fournier. If you're a Boston Celtics fan, Evan Fournier is a good player, right? He's a good player. He has size. He can shoot it. He's a good piece. But you need better pieces. Again, the Eastern Conference is a four-headed team race. It's really a three-headed team race, but you can put Miami in there too. But the rest of the teams are just below, underneath that. And the fact that they're worse than teams like Charlotte, who's young and kind of inexperienced. They're worse than the Knicks, who have a bunch of defensive, tough-minded role players and Julius Randle. The fact that they're worse than teams like Atlanta with Trae Young, who are young and inexperienced. This is a problem, right? It's not just Brad Stevens and Danny Ainge's fault, because it's a mixture of both, right? Danny Ainge has not made, I think, the proper free agency deals in a while, even though he's drafted very well. And he knows draft talent, and I think he understands basketball really well because he was a good coach with Phoenix. Ultimately, they're not making the right moves in free agency. They're not getting the right motivation, and they're coming out and not playing consistent basketball. Defensively, they're not very good. Offensively, they're not very good either. I mean, again, if you look at offensive efficiency in the NBA, they're not one of the top teams in offensive efficiency, right? If you look at top teams in offensive efficiency in the NBA, it's pretty obvious. It's Brooklyn, it's the Clippers, it's Denver, it's Utah. Boston's 12th. Again, they're behind teams like Dallas, Sacramento, Atlanta, New Orleans. Again, if you want to win, you got to be, if you're Boston and you're not great defensively, you got to at least be top 7 on the offensive end, right? It's why teams like Phoenix have been so successful, because Phoenix is top 6 defensively and top 7 offensively. It's why Brooklyn's been so good, because Brooklyn's is the best offensive efficiency team I think we'll ever see, right, in this modern age basketball. The Clippers are good because the Clippers are getting better defensively and they're great offensively, right? Utah's the same way. Denver has incredible offense. The Celtics just don't have that. The Celtics don't have that luxury. They're not as good offensively because their talent isn't that good, because they really have 2 guys who can score 20 a game, because Kemba Walker is not consistent there. I'm not saying Kemba Walker can't score 20 a game, but he's not going to shoot an efficient percentage doing it. And then you got Evan Fournier, who we don't know what he is. 23 points one night, then 0 the next night. I mean, if that's the way he's going to be, you're not going to be a very successful team. You're going to be in the play-in. In the play-in, anything can happen. Indiana is a team that, if you're a Boston fan, you should be definitely nervous about. If you're playing the Knicks or the Hawks or the Hornets, I mean, you have more talent than those teams, but I'm not guaranteeing a victory there. And that's the problem, right? It's not that Boston is not a good team. It's that they don't have the talent necessary to compete in the Eastern Conference. That's the problem. Milwaukee's got more talent. Philadelphia's got way more talent. Brooklyn's got more talent. Miami's got more talent. And Boston doesn't play very well together because, yes, their chemistry issues from all the COVID and injury protocols have been very hard on them. I think Brad Stevens needs to be partially responsible, but I don't think he needs to be in the hot seat. But he hasn't been probably, I think he could adjust his schemes better. I think that he can get the guys to play better defense. And I think also the fact that Danny Ainge has not made the proper moves to get this team in championship position. Not from a draft perspective. From a draft perspective, he's very good. But I think I'm talking about this free agency specifically, right? He didn't get guys like Andre Drummond. He didn't get guys like Aaron Gordon. And that's a big problem, right? That's a big problem. And even guys like LaMarcus Aldridge, who would have fit great on the Celtics as a big, couldn't get him either, right? The only guys he got were Mo Wagner and Evan Fournier. Evan Fournier is a good player, but he's not going to help you win a championship. And I'm not saying he can't score or be productive, but he's been a Jekyll and Hyde in terms of his production so far in Boston. I know it's been 3 games, but if you're sitting there and telling me that they're going to win an NBA championship with an inconsistent Kemba Walker, Jason Tatum, who, besides the stats, has been relatively inconsistent, Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, and Evan Fournier, who gives you 23 one night and 0 the next night. That team, I don't expect that team to get out of the first round. And I don't think they will. And I'm not saying Brad Stevens or Danny Ainge should be questioned about that. But the thing is, this happens, right, in basketball. Sometimes you're not going to be as successful. And the COVID year has been very difficult for everyone, obviously. But they have glaring holes, right? Their defense is not very good. Their bench production is not very good. They don't have a legitimate post scorer. Robert Williams could be that, but his skill level is not quite there yet, and he's always in foul trouble. Kemba Walker has been down. And the fact is that they just, look, if I look at them and I see they just don't have any reliable bench scoring either, right? Marcus Smart, not a reliable bench scorer. He's a great defender, but not a reliable bench scorer. Evan Fournier, well, Marcus Smart's a starter, my bad. But still, like, their depth is not great from a scoring perspective. Evan Fournier could be that, but he's inconsistent. And if you're going to win games, you can't be inconsistent. Especially if you want to win a championship. That's ultimately what it comes down to, right? Is that you want to try and win a championship, you got to be better than what you're producing. And that's ultimately what it comes down to, is you got to be able to produce, you got to be able to try and win a championship. And I think that Boston has that capabilities, but they haven't quite shown it consistently over time. And that's my issue with this team, is that they haven't shown a level of consistency that makes me excited about them going forward. And if they're going to actually sit there and say that they've done what they're supposed to do, I have to disagree. I think that they need to be better. They need to produce better. And right now, they really have not impressed me in what they've been able to do. And look, when you have no bench and your shot blockers always in foul trouble and out of the line with injuries, and you have not a consistent third scorer, you're not warming me with confidence. And that's the problem I see there with Boston, is that they just don't fill me up with confidence the same way that certain other teams do in the Eastern Conference. And ultimately, that's what happens at the end of the day, is you got to be more consistent if you're going to win a championship. And Boston hasn't proven that for me yet. And that's the problem I see with them, is they haven't proven anything to me yet that they've been able to get over the hump and be more successful down the road than they should be. And that's ultimately the problem with Boston, right? If they really want to win a championship, they got to be better than what they've produced for me. And again, when you don't splash any big name free agents, the other teams that are contending with you do splash people and get them into their lineups. It's just hard to look at you seriously. It's hard to look at that team seriously and think they're going to win a championship. That's what I think. And that's just the important thing there. It's just, you got to look at that and take that with a grain of salt. I mean, that's a tough situation. And that's what I ultimately think at the end of the day. You know, it's just, when you look at Boston, they don't strike fear in the East like they used to. And I just don't think they got the necessary talent to be successful in the Eastern Conference. That's what's wrong with Boston. They have inconsistent play from their guards, like Kemba Walker, no bench, inconsistent play with their bigs, and they don't play great defense. That's a lot of issues for a team that's trying to contend for a championship. And ultimately, you want to win a championship, you want to be regarded as one of the best teams in the NBA, you got to play better than what you're playing. It's not rocket science, everyone. So, that's what I kind of think about Boston, in my opinion. But that's going to wrap up the show here. Thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. A reminder to just subscribe to us on different podcast platforms that you listen to, as well as like our pages on Twitter and Facebook. We really would appreciate that. So this is the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I'm Michael Schroeder, and thank you for tuning in to the program.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gshmc.com. GSMCpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.